Hello everyone, welcome back to Archangel RC. Today I'm going to waste your time with the controversial Eachine Airloader FPV Cruiser. To be completely honest, the first time I saw it a few months ago, my first thought was that it was quite ugly. The tail was weird and it was shown with 3 motors in the photos, and also it had an unmistakable resemblance to a few other things, not excluding the Zoch.XL, which I thought was peculiar, but later found out it was designed by somebody who had worked over at Zocht, so then it started to make sense. Later on, I heard that Andrew Newton and Ali Shanmao had gotten into a heated exchange over the flight characteristics of this plane. Apparently, the airloader tip-stalled during Andrew's review, and because the plane was designed by a friend of Ali's, he took that personally, and from there on you either know the story or can guess what happened. As soon as people found out I was also waiting on an airloader, I became the tiebreaker, and all eyes were now fixed on me to build it, fly it, and break the argument one way or another. However, I am not going to take any one person's side in this argument, and I'm going to say that, as far as my experience with the plane goes, both sides are correct to a degree. Let's take a more detailed look at the plane now, because it certainly is a marvelous piece of work. There are some things that have been designed well and with thought, and then there are some ridiculous things. It almost feels like 2 people designed this. Some of the work was done by somebody in the know, and the rest of it was done by somebody who is completely clueless in these matters. And just to give a few examples, there is a foam piece with a tube already in it meant for an airspeed sensor, and comes with the proper offsets to ensure clean air would get to it, so you'd get an accurate reading of the airspeed. There are 3 locations where to mount this. Choice is up to you depending on your setup, although I think only the side options should be used. And I thought this was a brilliant idea, saving you a lot of time in DIYing a solution. The landing feet are also awesome. They seem to be made of some Teflon-like material, but they slide so well and do keep the foam safe. After 3 landings the other day, there isn't a scratch on the foam itself, only on the feet. Using an aluminum tube for the tail boom did seem weird at first, because back in the day I was using the same tubes to build my first copters, but having flown the plane I can see the merit in that. That tube is solid as a rock, does not twist, does not bend, and this is quite important when it comes to performance in extreme situations. For instance, when doing loops or playing with flat spins, or basically whatever you are doing using full servo travel for the tail control surfaces. The plane is quite stiff, which really shows in flight. Wings have carbon rods going all the way to the wingtips, and a solid rod in the horizontal stabilizer, which pairs well with the stiffness of the tail boom. Some might argue this is too heavy a solution, but I rather appreciate it, as it will allow for more stuff to be added to the front in terms of FPV gear, without having an issue with balancing the plane at the proper CG point. The main compartment is absolutely huge and can take a massive battery if need be, and at the proper speed the plane will carry it and even not be overly heavy in case you have no other electronics in there. The control horns are also very well thought out, with lots of contact surface between the foam and the horn, making sure this will not wiggle or deform and will last a long time. And in contrast, not a single proper plastic hinge anywhere on the plane, which will be over 1 kilogram of all-up weight. It is pretty unclear how one is supposed to mount the XT60 connectors for the ESCs on the wings in the case of a twin tractor setup. Also, not enough space has been provided by far for routing the wires for 2 servos and an ESC, let alone other gear mounted on the wings, at least without cutting foam out. It is also quite unclear, and this is the most ridiculous part, how you're supposed to get access to the matching connector on the fuselage to add wires to it, since it is mounted behind the plywood pieces holding the spar tube, which are glued, so you will have to be tearing them out to even have a chance of soldering any additional cables to the connector. This is absolutely mind-boggling. Motor nacelles look good, they seem to have enough surface area to be glued securely, and then you shut off the only way to wire all of this there, requiring the person literally to tear pieces out of the plane to get a twin wired, or alternatively cut and dig holes elsewhere. Really ridiculous decision. Then we have the vertical stabilizer, which is supposed to be installed using double-sided tape. I do realize that this one is not going to experience large forces, at least depending on how you use it, but I have never seen double-sided tape being used for something like this, and I have serious doubts about its longevity, hence why I also put some glue on the front part of the stabilizer where foam meets foam, in the hopes that it will be enough to hold it in the long run. And then there is the motor mount, which granted doesn't have a lot of up angle, which is good, but it also doesn't have any side angles, which is weird because a side angle is needed on single prop setups. Also, I'm not sure how I feel about the mount being hinged. There isn't any play in the hinge yet, but over time some play might develop, especially with rough landings, which will lead to this whole thing vibrating a lot, really ruining your FPV experience. I hope I am wrong, but I guess we will see in due time. Also, I'm really unclear what this huge air inlet just before the motor is supposed to do, since the only thing you see of the motor is the back end of the shaft, so can't argue it is meant to cool it that way. In my mind, it is only creating additional drag, and with that phase, you really don't need any more of that. Not to mention that the motor mount holes were not spaced out properly even for a 2212 motor, which I ended up using. Screws would have to end up under the motor if I'm to use a cross mount matching those holes, so I had to rotate the mount a bit to bring the motor to center, while having only one screw go into the proper hole. So yeah, quite a few things not quite okay with this one. Like I said, the contrast between the good and the bad things is quite large. Now, since I had no idea how this was actually going to fly, but I was only hearing bad things, I decided not to risk any good electronics, so opted out of installing an autopilot at this point and also reused the parts from the binary. Motor, ESC and all servos came from that plane, even has its battery, because without any FPV gear in the front I did have to use the largest one I had in order to balance the plane, and even so I had to push it into the camera compartment to get the CG right. Used an ancient FR Sky V8 R7 receiver because I didn't want to be breaking and ripping antennas out of the new ones. One thing that is really interesting is that there is an angle difference between the tail and the wings. Tail is flat while the wings have a few degrees of positive angle, which is an interesting design, probably aimed at creating more lift, so we will see how that's going to work once the plane gets flying. Also, when I set up the ailerons, I made them flush with the wing itself, and yet the unreleased flaps were hanging down a bit more, so I guess I will be taking advantage of some extra lift they will be generating. Even a little bit of deflection is going to have an effect. With the bigger battery, the plane would have an all-up weight of 1,400 grams for the Maiden, so I'd be happy with anything that would give it more lift and prevent it from stalling too easily. I did balance it very slightly nose heavy at the CG marks on the wings, and even though they do appear to be a good way forward from where they should be, I think the position is pretty accurate. Comparing the airloader's wing to the ill-fated binary's wing, we can see that the airloader's wing is about 4 cm longer, about 4 cm deeper in chord at the fuselage, and just a bit thicker, which means it should be able to more easily carry a larger load and not stall as easily as the binary at the same weight, but I guess flying and testing that would give the definitive answer. And so we get to the flying field and the maiden flight of the airloader. As you can already tell, I was prepared for disaster, so plane was running with the bare minimum gear necessary to fly. I didn't even have a separate back for the servos. As usual, before every flight, I verify the CG and then test all of the control surfaces for proper operation as well as the motor. I went with an 8x6 prop, hoping for more thrust from the smallish Sunny Sky motor and more speed once in the air. It barely clears the tail boom, so it will be noisy. After all the checks were done, and since I was ready for disaster, I had a friend throw it for me while I was ready with both hands at the sticks to try and prevent said disaster. Throttle up to about 60 or 70% so as not to have too much of a nose down effect from that up angled motor, and in a second the plane was off, and to my amazement it did not dip as I was expecting, nor did it crash to the ground in a ball of flames. It took to the skies with authority, but did require some trim. I had put in some very slight mechanical up elevator trim during setup because I thought there might be an issue with the motor pushing the nose down, so to counter that, but turns out I actually had to trim it down a bit. Perhaps the up angle on the wings was also the cause of this, as the plane was pulling up at higher throttle. Once trimmed, it was okay and stayed pretty much level even at higher throttle, but you could see how it dips the nose just a bit when you apply sudden full throttle and then back off. But this is not an issue, to be honest. It also required some left aileron trim as it was rolling to the right. This could be from the lack of a sight angle of the motor, because once I trimmed it to fly straight while the motor is running, when you throttle down it would roll slightly to the left, going into a circle, which is actually a nice setup for a full manual system with no autopilot. This is what you wanted to do in case of loss of signal. You wanted to roll slightly to one side and get into a circle to make sure it will not fly off. So, once trimming was done and the plane was flying straight and level, it was time to get to know it and start testing stow and its overall flight performance to see what all the fuss is about. And here is something to keep in mind. Following my binary incident, I was now flying this plane at higher throttle to avoid getting the airspeed too low and having it tip stow, since this is what I was told to expect from it. As the flight progressed, I did a few stow tests at higher altitude just in case, and it turned out that this one does stall indeed. But it does take a considerable slowdown to make it do so. Basically, under normal flying, while keeping the throttle up, it would be very difficult to stall it. I had to climb high, drop throttle, apply full up elevator, and only then did it tip stow, sort of. It went into something of a tight turn, wasn't really a spiral, and as soon as you let go of the elevator, it stops turning and looks solid as if on rails. This did not feel like the awful behavior everybody was bitching about, so I thought I'd give it another go, and the same thing happened. Nothing bad and quick and easy to get out of. So then I thought I'd help it by also giving it full right rudder to help it go into a spiral. And it did so, a tighter one compared to what only elevator caused, and this now did look like a proper spiral. But again, it takes no throttle, full up elevator and full rudder to make it happen, and only lasts as long as you hold the sticks. You let them go and it stops spinning and goes wherever you tell it to, which was quite reassuring. I did balance it slightly nose heavy and it did show during those stows, but since it did take quite the extreme situation to get it to stow like that, I decided to try and slow it down a bit during normal flight and see if that would make it stow, and if you stay on the controls and counter every lean, I was not able to make it stow even when I flew it just a few meters off the ground. Doesn't quite slow down as other planes are capable of, but the specs do say that stow speed is 30 kilometers an hour, so that is something to keep in mind and respect it. It does get wobbly around that speed indeed, so you would be wise to keep the throttle up. I did try gliding tests, but since the plane was nose heavy, it did point that nose slightly down once throttle was removed and picked up speed, so there was no danger of it tip stalling in that situation either. Flew for about 25 minutes in total and landed, flying above 50% throttle most of the time, and I'd only brought the battery down to 3.9 volts per cell, so with this one I'm pretty sure you can get at least 90 minutes of flight perhaps more with some throttle management. The battery is 4S3P, around 10 amp hours, so there's plenty of capacity in there. Landings were surprisingly easy and smooth. You can definitely feel that thicker wing profile and overall larger wing area compared to the binary working, and you have to keep in mind the fuselage is probably also contributing to the lifting force because it is flat, so should be acting as part of the wing even if only contributing a little bit. I took the chance to move the battery ever so slightly to the rear so I can get more of a neutral balance this time around. Check those surfaces like I do before every flight with every plane, and threw it in the air, this time by myself, so I can see how easy it would be, and it worked just fine with it only dipping a little bit, probably because of how I threw it. Took it up high and tested the stall behavior again with this new neutral balance, and this time using elevator only. It did a tighter spin, though still not what you would consider a spiral. It was quite docile really and would give you plenty of time to react, provided you are high enough, so changing the balance to a more neutral one does make a difference in how it stalls, but recovery was still the same, just have to let go of the sticks. Second test was with full elevator and rudder, and like before, that did result in a spiral, but again recovers very easy when you release the sticks back to center. I did some more flying, trying to slow down as much as possible in order to get it to stall, and you can slow it down a bit, but again have to stay on those controls if you don't have an autopilot in it taking care of that for you. But in general, try to keep the speed above 30 km an hour at all times, giving it a bit more in the turns, and you should be good. Next, I took it higher than before and stalled it using rudder and elevator again, but this time I did keep holding them for a bit longer, and something very interesting happened. At some point, the plane went from a spiral to a flat spin, and its falling speed dropped considerably. It looked like a falling autumn leaf, just spinning and not really in a hurry to come down. This was an awesome sight to see and was quite fun doing it, as I did it a few more times after that, just for the fun of it. Only drawback here is that it doesn't recover from that one just by releasing the sticks. Once you get to that flat spin, you will have to give it down elevator and push the throttle to full a few times to get the plane out of it. But again, nothing too difficult, just have to keep in mind it will not get out on its own from a flat spin. I have never seen a plane of this type do something like this, so it was quite fun to make it do it again and again. Next flight, I even got brave enough to put my DJI Osmo action camera in there, balanced to neutral again, and did try the same stall scheme just to see how it would look from the plane's point of view, and it is certainly dizzying, but a whole lot of awesome too. After that, I just had some fun with the plane, flying fast and low to the ground, and even though I had limited throws to 70% from the radio and had 50% expo on ailerons and elevator, this thing was still quite agile, so keep that in mind. Definitely not a beginner plane by any measure. I did like the stiffness that the tailbone provided though, because the elevator was solid and during full elevator maneuvers it did not even twitch, and the plane remained on track at all times, like you can see during the full elevator loops. I did tons of them and rolls as well, flew it in as tight of a circle as I felt comfortable with, did some more loops and rolls, even flew it inverted, and it actually does pretty darn good flying inverted. It is predictable and controllable. Granted, I did fly it in calm conditions, but I was very pleased with the plane and it was great fun and performed well and felt solid in the air. But like I said, not a beginner's plane. You really have to stay on it, especially if you decide to be slowing it down. Using full up elevator to get out of some maneuvers close to the ground did not make it flex and bend and twist like other planes do in similar situations, and often end up crashing because of that. Yes, it is no Argberg VTOL or MFD Crosswind Pro or Volantex Phoenix 2400 kind of stall resistant, but I'd actually put it on par with the Reptile Dragon because that one also has a similar stow in manual mode, but this one actually has more space for a larger battery, so can be made a good deal heavier, which will affect the stall speed and recovery. But like I said, Keep that speed above 30 or 35 kilometers an hour and you should be good, which is actually pretty solid advice for most planes out there anyway. I was also quite happy with how the binary's guts were performing, especially considering that I'm only using one of the motors. Upon landing, ESC and battery were cold, even after all these climbs, loops, rolls, etc. I was at high throttle most of the time, still cold, but in all fairness, it does suck in a lot of cold air through that large open mouth at the front. Motor was just barely warm, though granted the plane does not have unlimited vertical with this particular setup, but that is not really much of an issue for me as I did like its performance even so and might just keep all of that gear in there. I absolutely loved the landing feet, they do slide quite well and do keep the foam off the ground and away from damaging stuff. 3 landings and there are pretty much no scratches on the foam other than some coloring from the grass it goes over. During one of the takeoffs my friend sort of pushed the tail up a bit more and nosed the plane down, which sent it into the ground, but I thought not to stop and just gave it full throttle and some elevator and actually did a rolling takeoff going down the slope, which was awesome, and again no damage to the foam, so those feet are an awesome design feature in my mind. After I was done flying for the day, I did watch Andrew's video and saw how his flipped and crashed, and I think it is a combination of a few things. He was flying in pretty turbulent conditions and the way it flipped, to me it seemed like it was a gust of wind that actually flipped it, which has also happened to me on numerous occasions with a number of planes in manual mode, which is also what he mentioned in his video and is something that should not be ignored. Couple that with the low altitude and there was no time for recovery, and like I have shown, recovery for this one is pretty easy, but you do need altitude for it, and he didn't have any. Same as when I crashed the binary right after its maiden takeoff, just didn't have enough altitude for recovery. Yes, the plane would stall, just like many other planes would, but only under certain conditions. So just like with all those other planes, make sure to keep the throttle up and stay out of those stall-inducing situations. Now that I know how the Airloader performs, next step would be to install an autopilot in it, and in this case I will be testing a new one, the Detrom Z3 FPV autopilot system. This was sent to me to review and I accepted only because it seemed like a good plug and play package that would be easy to connect as everything is made to fit together and hopefully easy to get it going, especially for beginners or newcomers to autopilots, and the price is very reasonable for the package as well, so I guess we will see how it will perform when I get to it. Only thing it is missing is an airspeed sensor, so I can't make use of that awesome tube mount they've designed for the Airloader, but I've gone without one so far, so I'm sure I'll be okay. So I will be getting to work on that Detrom Z3 install, which I hope you will be able to see in action soon, but until then, links for all items shown and used can be found in the description below, and buying literally anything through them would support this channel at no additional cost to you, and you will have my eternal gratitude as this is my full-time job. Another way you can support me is Patreon, the link is also there, and I would like to say a big thank you to all the people who have supported me so far in any way and would continue to do so. If you have enjoyed this video and found it useful, please feel free to like, share and subscribe if you haven't already, and don't forget to hit that bell button so you can be notified when I upload a new one. Also consider following me on Facebook. Happy and safe tip stalling, hopefully on purpose, and I will see you in the next one.